Imagine waking up and you can see your own breath inside your house. The water in the bowl by your bed has a thin skin of ice on it. The fire went out in the night, and the cold has crept into everything. The walls, the floor, the blankets, your bones. Outside, the snow is past the windows, and the nearest help, the nearest warmth, the nearest anything, is hours away through a frozen white silence. This was winter for almost every human who has ever lived. No thermostat, no furnace humming in the basement, no flick of a switch to make the cold go away. For thousands of years, winter wasn't an inconvenience. It was a season that tried to kill you, every single year. And yet, somehow, people made it through, generation after generation, in some of the coldest places on Earth, with nothing but fire, cleverness, and each other. So how? How did people survive winters that would leave most of us dead in a matter of hours? The answer is a mix of brilliant, brutal, and genuinely surprising. And by the end of this, you'll never look at a cold night the same way again. Let's step into the cold. First, you have to understand exactly what these people were up against, because we've forgotten, truly forgotten, how dangerous cold really is. Today, if you're cold, you're uncomfortable. For most of history, if you were cold, you were in danger. The human body is a tropical machine. We're built for warmth. Drop our core temperature just a few degrees and everything starts to fail. The hands stop working, the mind goes foggy, the body starts shutting down piece by piece to protect the heart. And the cold didn't come alone. Winter brought its allies. When the snow fell, the food stopped growing, the animals vanished or went thin. The days shrank down to a few gray hours of light. So, a person fighting the cold was usually also fighting hunger and darkness and isolation all at once. In the harshest winters of history, whole villages could be cut off for months. If you ran out of food in January, there was no store, no road, no rescue. There was only what you had stored, and your wits. So people didn't just survive winter by accident. They prepared for it all year long. In fact, the real secret to surviving winter started in summer. And that's where most people get this completely wrong. They picture survival as something that happens in the storm. But for our ancestors, surviving the cold was a battle they won months before the first snow ever fell. Let me show you what I mean. The single most important weapon against winter wasn't fire. It wasn't fur. It was food stored ahead of time. From the moment the harvest came in, the race was on. Everything was about one question. Will we have enough to last until spring? And not just enough food, enough fuel, enough everything. People became masters of preserving. Without refrigeration, they found a dozen ways to cheat rot and decay. They salted meat until it could last for months. They smoked fish and game over slow fires until it turned hard and dry and lasted through the dark season. They buried root vegetables in cool cellars and pits, packed in straw and sand where they'd keep for half a year. They turned milk into cheese, fruit into preserves, grain into things that wouldn't spoil. A well-prepared household in autumn was a thing of quiet pride, shelves and cellars packed with the difference between life and death. Walking into a full storeroom in October meant you'd probably see spring. Walking into an empty one meant you were already in trouble. And it wasn't only food they stockpiled. Firewood was just as precious. In cold regions, gathering and chopping and drying enough wood to burn all winter was a massive, exhausting job that took months. Wood that's freshly cut won't burn well. It has to dry or season for a long time. So people had to think a full year ahead, cutting this winter's wood last spring and next winter's wood this summer. Imagine the discipline in that. You're sweating in the summer heat, swinging an axe, gathering fuel for a cold that's half a year away. Because you know, with absolute certainty, that the cold is coming. And if you're lazy now, you freeze later. That mindset, prepare relentlessly, because nature shows no mercy, is something we've almost entirely lost. But for our ancestors, it was simply the price of being alive. So the food was stored, the wood was stacked, now the cold arrives. What did they actually do day to day to keep from freezing? That's where it gets clever. And one of their best tricks is something almost no one would think of today. Let's talk about the home itself, because the building was your first and most important shield against the cold. People didn't heat their whole house the way we do. That would have been impossible, far too much fuel. Instead, they did something much smarter. They heated people, not space. And they designed their entire lives around holding on to warmth. Homes were built small and low on purpose. A big tall room is beautiful, and it's a nightmare to keep warm because heat rises and escapes. So, winter homes were often compact, with low ceilings, thick walls, and tiny windows. Small windows let in less light, yes, but they also let out far less heat. Comfort lost to the summer, survival won in the winter. The walls themselves were weapons against the cold. People packed them with whatever insulated: thick stone, mud, turf, straw, even animal dung mixed into the walls. In some northern cultures, people built homes partly into the earth itself, because the ground stays at a steady temperature and shields you from the wind. A house dug into a hillside was warmer than one standing alone in the open, every time. And here's one of the most surprising tricks of all. In many farming households, the animals didn't sleep in a separate barn. They slept inside, often just on the other side of a low wall from the family. Why? Because a cow or a few animals give off a remarkable amount of body heat, like living radiators. The smell was bad. The warmth was worth it. The animals helped heat the home, and the home helped keep the animals alive. Everyone survived together. Think about that the next time you complain about a drafty room. Our ancestors were sleeping next to livestock, on purpose, because that warmth might be the difference between waking up and not. But even the best-built home needed a heart, a source of fire. And the way they managed that fire was an art form all its own, one that, if they got it wrong, could mean death by morning. The fire was everything. It was warmth, it was cooked food, it was light in the long darkness. It was the center the whole household gathered around. And keeping it alive was a sacred, constant duty. Here's something we never think about. Starting a fire from nothing was hard. No matches, no lighter. Striking a spark with flint and steel, or rubbing wood, then coaxing it into flame, could take a long, frustrating time, especially with cold hands and damp wood. So people almost never let the fire go fully out. Instead, they banked it. At night, they'd cover the glowing coals with ash, which would keep them smoldering, alive but slow, through the long hours of darkness. In the morning, you'd uncover those coals, feed them a little, breathe them back to life, and you'd have your fire again without starting over. In many homes, the same fire burned in a sense for years. Letting it die completely was almost a small disaster, and they were clever about how they used that heat. In some cultures, people heated stones in the fire, then wrapped them in cloth and took them to bed. A warm stone at your feet could hold heat for hours under the blankets. In others, they built beds up on platforms above where the warm air collected, or even ran the smoke and heat from the fire underneath the floor or sleeping area, warming it from below. A heated floor, centuries before modern technology, just from understanding how heat moves. The bed itself was a fortress against the night, piled high with furs, wool, straw, and heavy blankets. And almost nobody slept alone. The whole family often shared one bed, or slept huddled close together, because the simplest, oldest source of heat in the world is another human body. Shared warmth wasn't strange or shameful. It was survival. Curling up together against the cold is one of the most ancient human acts there is. So they had the fire, the home, the bed, the shared warmth. But there's one more layer between them and the cold, and it was wrapped right around their bodies. Clothing, before modern fabrics, was a matter of life and death, and people understood it far better than we might assume. The secret to staying warm isn't one thick layer. It's many layers, with air trapped between them, because still air is one of the best insulators there is. Our ancestors knew this in their bones. They dressed in layer upon layer, wool against the skin, furs and hides over the top, cloaks and wraps and hoods. Wool was a miracle material, and still is. It keeps you warm even when it's damp, which mattered enormously in a wet, snowy world. Furs and animal skins, with the fur turned inward against the body, trapped warmth beautifully. Every part of the body that lost heat fastest, the head, the hands, the feet, got special protection. Hats, hoods, mittens, wrappings, layers of stockings, boots stuffed with straw or fur for insulation. And in the very coldest places humans ever lived, the far north, the Arctic, people became the absolute masters of this. They developed clothing so effective, made from caribou and seal and other animals, that they could survive temperatures that would kill an unprepared person in minutes. Loose enough to trap warm air, tight enough at the edges to keep the wind out, layered with a genius that modern winter gear designers still study today. Let that sink in. Some of the warmest clothing principles we use right now were perfected thousands of years ago by people with nothing but animals, bone needles, and hard-won knowledge, surviving in a frozen world that should have been impossible to live in. But surviving the cold of the body was only half the battle, because winter attacked the mind, too. And this is the part of the story almost no one talks about. Picture months of this, the short gray days, the endless nights, trapped inside a small, smoky room, snowed in, the same faces, the same walls, week after week after week. The food supply slowly shrinking, the sun barely showing its face. Winter wasn't just a physical test. It was a test of the spirit. The isolation, the darkness, and the confinement could crush a person. And our ancestors knew this. So they fought back against the darkness with something just as important as fire and food. They fought it with togetherness. This is why so many of humanity's great festivals and feasts happen in the dead of winter. All across the world, in completely different cultures, people built their brightest celebrations into the darkest, coldest part of the year. They lit candles and fires against the long night. They gathered, they sang, they told stories, they shared what food they had. They created warmth that wasn't just physical. It was the warmth of being together when the world outside was trying to freeze you out. The long winter nights became the time for storytelling. Knowledge, history, myths, and memory passed down by the fire, from the old to the young, while the wind howled outside. Whole traditions of human culture were shaped by people huddled together, doing the one thing that made the dark bearable, keeping each other company. So, when you ask how people survived winter, here's an answer you might not expect. They survived it together, not just with bodies pressed close for warmth, but with stories and songs and celebration that kept their spirits from freezing as surely as the fire kept their hands from it. So, let's pull it all together. Let's go back to that frozen morning we started with. Breath in the air, ice in the bowl, snow past the windows. How did they survive it? Not with one trick, but with everything at once. They survived because they prepared for months. The stored food, the seasoned wood, the relentless work done long before the cold arrived. They survived through clever homes that trapped warmth and shared it even with their animals. They survived through fire kept alive like a treasure, through heated stones and shared beds and layered furs perfected over thousands of years. And they survived through each other, through the simple, ancient power of human bodies and human company against the long dark. Every one of us alive today is descended from people who made it through winter after winter after winter, with none of the comforts we take for granted. They felt a cold we can barely imagine. They watched the snow rise past the windows, and they did not give up. They prepared, they huddled, they endured, and they passed life forward into the spring. So, the next time the heating clicks on in your warm house and the cold is just a number on a screen, remember what it once cost simply to make it to spring. Remember the stored harvests, the banked fires, the bodies huddled close in the dark. They survived the winter so that, one day, you wouldn't have to fear it. And that is a kind of strength worth remembering. If this gave you a new respect for the people who came before us, that's exactly what this channel is about. We dig into how humans survived the things that should have killed them. So, here's my question for you, and I read the comments. If you were dropped into one of these winters with no modern technology, do you think you'd survive? Be honest. Drop it below. And if you want more stories of how people survived the impossible, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.